In international politics, the CCP has chosen numerous countries as partners, creating a complex and extensive diplomatic network. However, recent evidence suggests that these friends are not true allies, but rather harmful associates. These countries are mostly authoritarian regimes or economically struggling nations whose policies and actions often draw concern and criticism from the international community. On May 16th, Putin, who is on the wanted list with the International Criminal Court, arrived in Beijing and received the highest level reception from the CCP, led by Xi Jinping himself. This is Putin's first foreign visit since starting his fifth term, and he is expected to seek greater support from China for the Ukraine war and Russia's sanctions-hit economy. Meanwhile, Xi Jinping is under increasing diplomatic and economic pressure from the West to reduce support for Moscow and address the Russia-Ukraine war. Xi had just completed a European tour, seeking to improve relations with Europe to revive China's sluggish economy. During Xi's visit to Europe, the U.S. initiated the latest round of sanctions on Chinese companies involved with Russia, further highlighting the economic costs of continuing support for Russia. On the morning of the 16th, Xi Jinping welcomed Putin in front of the Great Hall of the People, followed by talks and the signing of the joint statement of the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation on deepening the comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination for the new era in the context of the 75th anniversary of China-Russia diplomatic relations. According to the state media, CCTV, Xi Jinping stated that the talks were extensive and both sides will continue to deepen political trust based on the principles of non-alignment, non-confrontation, and not targeting any third party. A blogger on X named Walls of China Absurdity commented, "The joint statement is long, but in plain terms, it's just a support agreement with Russia, essentially about giving money and resources." Russia reported prominently that the Kremlin's press office announced that the leaders would discuss all issues of the strategic partnership and cooperation and discuss the most urgent international and regional issues. In the YouTube video by China Affairs commentator Wen Zhao, he noted that when first compared to their 2022 joint statement, this time it omitted the phrase, "Friendship between the two states has no limits. There are no forbidden areas of cooperation." This phrase, which can be interpreted as limitless cooperation, has sparked analysis about its significance. Some media outlets, citing an international relations expert from Shanghai, suggest that interactions between countries must not harm national interests, and there is always a limit. The previous term, no limits, was merely rhetorical and shouldn't be taken too seriously. China cannot endlessly support Putin's war in Ukraine, and Putin will not return the seized eastern Ukrainian territories despite any persuasion from China, so both sides have their limits. Wen Zhao believes this rhetoric is likely a way to temper the international reaction to the warm embrace between Xi and Putin, implying that CCP diplomacy remains rational and that maintaining relations with the West is essential. Investors shouldn't overreact and should continue their investments. Wen Zhao also mentioned that the China-Russia joint statement includes cooperation in trade, finance, tourism, culture, military, intellectual property, and even nuclear technology, as well as the same stance regarding global conflicts like the Israel-Palestine conflict and the Afghanistan issue. This comprehensive agreement, though not termed as such, essentially functions as a full-scale alliance. Despite not mentioning no limits, no forbidden zones, the content effectively suggests such a stance, expanding on the previous 2 years' joint statements. However, joint statements itself is merely an expression of a common position without legal binding force. The real outcomes will depend on the specific arrangements and treaties signed afterward. An ex-user commented, "If Russia had not invaded China historically, China would undoubtedly have the largest land area today. Yet, we treat a country that occupied our vast territories as a comrade and brother. Unlike Russia, the U.S. has never taken an inch of Chinese land and has helped China the most. So why demonize the U.S.? It's simple. The existence of the U.S. highlights the shamelessness of authoritarian rule. Demonizing the U.S. allows the CCP to continue deceiving the people." China commentator Sai-Shen Kun noted the former Soviet Union and the CCP were once brothers, even like a father-son relationship, but later became mortal enemies. After the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia-China relations gradually normalized, with the CCP buying off former Soviet Central Asian countries. Over the past decade, Russia-China relations developed rapidly until the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine war, elevating their relationship to a shoulder-to-shoulder, limitless alliance. Facing Western pressure and sanctions, future Russia-China cooperation will become more extensive, significantly impacting the international geopolitical landscape. The CCP's relationship with Russia is widely seen as strategic cooperation, but in reality, there are many conflicts and competitions between the two. Although they often jointly oppose Western influence on international affairs, their geopolitical and economic interests frequently clash. For instance, in Central Asia, Russia sees the region as its traditional sphere of influence. However, China's Belt and Road Initiative has expanded its influence there, causing Russian unease and dissatisfaction. Additionally, Russia's dependence on China for energy and arms sales adds complexity and sensitivity to their relationship. Despite some consensus on countering the West, the conflicts of interest and mutual suspicions remain a significant concern. Historically, China-Russia relations have experienced many ups and downs. In the 1950s, they formed a close alliance due to ideological and strategic alignment, but relations quickly deteriorated and reached its worst during the Cold War in the 1960s. Although relations have eased in recent years, historical issues persist, especially regarding territorial disputes and resource competition. Their strategic cooperation is primarily based on practical interests rather than genuine trust and friendship. Recently, a video interview with India's former ambassador to Russia, Pankaj Saran, by an Indian journalist has been circulating online. The discussion mainly revolves around the relationships among China, Russia, India, and the United States. Saran stated that currently, in terms of power, China far surpasses Russia, but from a sociological and political perspective, it is impossible for Russia to submit to China. He also pointed out that the fundamental contradiction between China and Russia is that China wants to befriend Russia while engaging with the West. This comment by Saran exposes the reality behind the so-called limitless China-Russia relationship. Before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, although China and Russia were strengthening bilateral relations, they also often exploited each other, with Moscow's goodwill toward Beijing being limited. However, since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 and subsequent Western sanctions, Moscow has become increasingly isolated internationally and reliant on China for economic and military support. Without the continuous flow of funds and military supplies from China, Russia would struggle to sustain the war and its economy. One example is that after Putin was re-elected, he immediately appointed Deputy Prime Minister Belousov, who also chairs the Russian-Chinese Commission on Investment Cooperation, as defense minister. The aim is to improve efficiency and quickly allocate funds and military supplies obtained from China to the Russian military. Yet, as Saran stated, it is impossible for Russia to truly submit to China. And the CCP, unwilling to decouple from the West, will find it difficult to earn Moscow's genuine trust. With the continuous sanctions from the U.S., how will the top officials of the CCP continue to support Moscow? During the interview, the journalist remarked that China has no friends, to which Saran replied that China only has harmful friends. Saran's jest may seem cold to CCP media, but it reflects reality. Looking around the world, from governments to individuals, how many true friends does the CCP have? Democratic governments are unwilling to befriend the CCP. Would the governments of non-democratic countries be sincere friends with the CCP? How many of the CCP's old friends are dictators, and how many have met bad ends? In 2011, a reporter from Southern Weekly examined and tallied articles from the People's Daily from 1949 to 2010. The results showed that over the past 60 years, 601 individuals from 123 countries were termed old friends of the Chinese people, meaning friends of the CCP. This also includes some dictators, such as the overthrown Egyptian President Mubarak, Libyan President Gaddafi, Cambodia's Pol Pot, North Korea's Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un, Zimbabwe's Mugabe, and Prince Sihanouk of Cambodia. However, in the past decade or so, many of the CCP's old friends have died, dictatorships have been overthrown, and some dictators have met tragic ends. Those who are still alive and rational have seen the CCP's increasing irrationality and have chosen to remain silent. So, are the current regimes of Russia, North Korea, and Iran, which are close to the CCP, truly friends of the CCP? At least in words, the CCP considers them friends. The CCP leader Xi once said that Russian President Putin is my best, most intimate friend, while Putin calls Xi Jinping dear friend. The CCP has also repeatedly referred to North Korea as China's good neighbor, good friend, good comrade, and Iran as China's good friend, good brother, good partner.
Why
do some countries always fail to retain their former allies? Let me tell you, it's not just some countries. Any relationship between nations that is based on brotherhood is doomed to fail. For instance, China was once in comradeship and brotherhood with Vietnam, Albania, North Korea, and Pakistan. But at the slightest dissatisfaction, they turn against you faster than turning a page. In contrast, countries led by the US build their relationships on contracts and rules, not brotherly affection. As long as you follow the rules and honor the contracts, everyone can face each other with ease. Got it?
True friends are honest and trustworthy, not driven by interest to define their relationships. Clearly, the CCP cannot attract such friends. As the saying goes, birds of a feather flock together. The CCP, known for distorting the truth, surrounds itself with Russia, North Korea, and Iran. Which of these governments are honest and trustworthy? They only flatter the CCP to gain benefits. On one hand, Russia, North Korea, and Iran seek economic, military, political, and high-tech support from the CCP to maintain their regimes. On the other hand, the CCP uses them to create global chaos and export violence and disorder to promote its so-called community with a shared future for mankind. As for the countries in Africa, Southeast Asia, South America, and the ones that Xi Jinping recently visited, like Hungary and Serbia, aren't they all motivated commercially? Would any of them support the CCP when the money runs out? So, the former Indian ambassador to Russia was right. The friendships the CCP builds with money are unreliable and are actually harmful friends. After receiving substantial aid from the CCP, these nations may not remain loyal and might distance themselves or even betray the CCP in critical times. Previously circulated online information suggests that Kim Jong-il left instructions to Kim Jong-un saying, "Do not trust China and strive to establish diplomatic relations with the U.S. as soon as possible." This clearly shows the distrust behind the so-called blood-forged friendship between China and North Korea. If North Korea is like this, Russia and Iran are no exceptions. So why can't the CCP find true friends in the world? Over 70 years ago, the CCP itself gave the answer. In an editorial in Xinhua Daily on October 9, 1944, titled, "The Law of the Global Democratic Family Applies to China," it stated, "The Tehran Conference solemnly declared that we must create a peace that will win the goodwill of the vast majority of the people of all nations, a peace without tyranny, enslavement, oppression, and suffering. Those who cannot win the goodwill of the majority and attempt to deprive them of their freedom will have no place in the global democratic family because the family already has a rule. Fascists who suppress free speech are not allowed." Isn't this exactly about the current CCP? In a speech at Liberty University's graduation ceremony, former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said,
"You all are going to come into a world where Russia and China and Iran, they're all eager to chip away at our Judeo-Christian founding. They want to see an America in decline. They want to destroy the very freedoms that we are celebrating here today. And they want to drive our nation away from the Lord."
The CCP, unable to join the global democratic family and distrusted by democratic countries in Europe, the US, Japan, and South Korea, is reaping the consequences of its actions. A popular cartoon circulating online vividly depicts Xi Jinping's CCP. In the image, Xi is portrayed as a giant ATM, with Putin and Kim Jong-un in the middle, flanked by the Taliban and terrorist organizations. This perfectly illustrates how the CCP buys off some small allies and so-called friends with money, but the duration of such friendships is limited and they can turn on him any time. A regime that lacks integrity, doesn't follow rules, and distorts facts cannot gain the trust of any government or individual, leaving only interest-based exchanges. In the end, the isolated CCP will not only be abandoned by the Chinese people, but also by the world.